That was good. Well, good afternoon. And thank you for joining us today, whether in person or via Zoom. My name is Joe Andriano, and I'm a founding board member of EMS Access. My professional connection to the organization is based on 20 years of analyzing the management, operations, and policies of New York City government agencies. Before becoming involved in performance and program management, I was a firefighter with the FDNY. And so I've worked in firehouses and responded to emergencies in all 5 boroughs. And I've worked with very talented and committed EMTs on nearly every tour during that time. When Matthew first asked me to join him in establishing a nonprofit dedicated to creating stronger leaders in the volunteer EMS community, I was curious to hear what he meant. Like most of the public, I never gave thought to how volunteer ambulance corps are run. I just considered the timeliness and quality of care I or someone I know received when seeking emergency medical attention. I didn't consider the challenges in leading a volunteer ambulance organization, what it meant to attract volunteers to give their talent and time to a cause, to raise money in support of an operation, and to build the foundation for long-term stability and viability of an organization. Matthew noticed a lack of attention being paid to these less visible, but no less critical aspects of running volunteer EMS agencies. It's why we formed EMS Access. We are aiming to provide support to those who manage or are looking to manage one of the many volunteer EMS organizations throughout New York, via conferences like this one, and fellowships that work with individual organizations over the course of a year. As it says on our website, serving those who serve us, or as I like to say, helping New Yorkers help New York. The next topic of today's program will be a panel discussion on volunteer leadership. We've assembled a few of your peers who lead some of the more successful EMS organizations to share their insights on what it means to be an effective leader in volunteer EMS. Let me introduce them to you now. To my immediate right is Jerry Gelbard. With over 40 years in volunteer EMS, chances are you probably know or have worked with Jerry Gelbard. He's currently the Chief of Operations of the Glen Oaks Volunteer Ambulance Corps, which serves the communities of Northeast Queens with both basic and advanced life support ambulances, the latter of which was given state approval in 2020. Glen Oaks Volunteer Ambulance Corps has been answering the call since 1973. It has over 90 EMTs, 14 paramedics, 34 dispatchers, and another 27 youth organization members. So they're already preparing for the next generation of community leaders. Jerry's also a regional director for the New York State Volunteer Ambulance and Rescue Association, representing the interests of volunteer EMS community throughout the entire state. In addition, Jerry has been a paramedic for over 30 years. He's a retired FDNY EMS captain and was a grants and emergency management specialist for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Please welcome Jerry. Louis Greco is in the center. He is the chief of Park Slope Volunteer Ambulance Corps, a position he's held since 2013. He joined the organization in 2006, and as chief, he's responsible for overseeing a coverage area of more than 350,000 residents and a staff of nearly 150 volunteers. The great work he and his colleague at Park Slope performed garnered them New York One's New Yorkers of the Week in November 2017. Mr. Greco has a BA in Fire and Emergency Service and Emergency Management from John Jay College. He's also the CEO of New Jersey Mobile Healthcare, an emergency medical service and ambulance transport provider serving the communities of northern New Jersey. Please welcome Louis Greco. And to my far right is Jesus Rodriguez. Since 2018, Jesus Rodriguez has been the board chairman of the Ridgewood Volunteer Ambulance Corps. As board chair, he is the chief executive officer of the organization. Mr. Rodriguez has been an EMT since 2008 and has been involved in EMS since 2005. He's been with Ridgewood Volunteer Ambulance Corps since 2012 and has served in various leadership roles within the organization, such as lieutenant of operations and as a captain. Chairman Rodriguez is also a CPR instructor and enjoys training new recruits on the ambulance. Aside from volunteer EMS, he owns a small IT and security integration business and is an active board member on another not-for-profit organization. Please welcome Jesus Rodriguez. So the questions I'll ask the panelists will be a combination of general management principles and specific experience they've encountered within the field. I'm hoping for a free-flowing conversation. Say that a couple times fast. And we'll leave a few minutes at the end for questions for the audience. So let's get started. I'm going to just open this up to everyone. What's your biggest challenge in leading an EMS organization? And has that changed since COVID-19, or is that, or as a result of the pandemic?
I guess as the dinosaur in the room, I'll start it off. We kind of touched on it in our breakout groups earlier about recruitment, retention, but I want to add in another piece that we seldom look at, and that's training and scheduling. Scheduling today of our volunteer workforce is very challenging. It's very dynamic, very fluid. We have to work around their schedules. The old 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours just doesn't work like it used to. We used to plug them in on the schedule, and every week everyone will be there. The other piece that's becoming or has been challenging, and as New York State increases the requirements for EMS providers, is training and retraining. I know you all really don't like the annual training memos that come out from your regional EMS council or the state. And it takes time away from school, family, and other activities. So to merge and mesh all of these into one, to make it work for any individual becomes a significant challenge. And there's no one size fits all. You have to find the mean area that your membership likes. Your school age, members might like to do it one way. Your older adults are different learners. They want to do something else another way. And that also transcribes into when their availability is. So you have to meet the challenge of all different demographics of your workforce to achieve your mission, and that's to get your ambulances out on the road, aside from all of your other daily duties administratively and at the board level. So that's something we need to look at as we move forward.
I would piggyback on that, and I would completely agree 100% with everything Jerry's saying. I think one big thing that we've all seen and heard in the media that across the country in every field, if it's healthcare or beyond, that there's a challenge when it comes to a workforce, if it's a career workforce or a volunteer workforce, those challenges are the same. And I think a big thing that has affected us in the I don't want to say post-COVID environment, but in the current environment is acknowledging what is it that makes our members want to come in? What is it that makes them want to be engaged? And what are the hurdles that prevent them from doing so? And when you're dealing with a 100% volunteer workforce like what we have in our agencies, we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to be able to make sure that we're understanding of it. How do we do our scheduling? How do we do our matchmaking of partners? We're taking two people who may have completely different walks of life in their everyday life, and we merge them together and we send them out into sometimes some difficult situations, right? So how do we take all of those, merge them together is something that I think that we need to continue to grow and look at. The more we look at them, the more we can determine, all right, what are the changes that we can make? Do we adjust the way we do the scheduling? Do we adjust the way that we partner folks? How quickly do we get folks out into the field from when they initially sign up to become a member? I think those things all really play in and have to be constantly reevaluated.
I also want to add and effective communication at that, because especially now after COVID, most of our policies and our stuff was for before COVID, and now with COVID, it changes a lot. Where during COVID, we were able to have meetings virtually and stuff like that. That I believe hindered us a little bit when we're used to having meetings in a room together where grievances or whatever would get resolved right there on the spot. And now because everything is recorded and it's online, you don't want to address those issues at a meeting, and it just delays process and stuff like that. So I would say effective communication is a big problem.
Okay. All right, well, question 2 is going to be more just personal. When did you decide to become more involved in volunteer leadership? What particular experiences led you to think, you know what, I should get more involved with my organization? Anyone can go.
Let's just keep going this way.
Well, quite frankly, it kind of crept up on me without me even knowing it. For those that know me many years back, I was a cocky 18-year-old kid that came out of an EMT class, and I was writing a lot of calls because I just came out of high school. I was in a local college, and I didn't want to be home. I wanted to be out, and I started riding the ambulance, and obviously everyone knows the rest was history, but I kind of started to notice that the agency would partner me with brand new drivers that didn't have an EMT card, very little experience. And one day I said, what are you doing? I'm getting all the new people. And they said, well, from the back of the truck, you can figure out how to navigate the new driver up front and you can get them through anything. And I was like, okay, it sounds pretty good. And as I aged and I attained my 21st birthday, I started to look at the things around our organization. I said, I could do that better, or I want to have a say. And that's how I progressed, and actually was the president of my volunteer ambulance corps back in the late 80s, in my late 20s. And it
Well,
was a challenge.
let me just break in right there. So you felt like this, say an inkling to like, I want to get more involved. Like, were there leaders within the organization at that point saying, hey, get this kid involved? He seems like ready to take on more responsibilities.
I think it was a combination. Some of them were saying they didn't want change as we know it. And the other side was like, listen, obviously I had no formal training. I'm still in college. What did I know about, managing 100 people? But I said, you know what? I'm going to learn, and I'm going to learn the hard way, one way or another. I picked out some people that I can identify that have some good qualities and I can learn from, and I listened to, and I kept going. And obviously I was part of EMS in the city at that point. I became a lieutenant, so I went through formal management training, and I tried to strive to learn more about how to manage and lead from different ways. So that was my initial, I guess, drive or push, because part of it was I wanted to, and the other part was I didn't want to be pushed down by some people that felt that I was young and I didn't know anything. And, that kind of challenged me. And I just kept, seeking out new ways to learn different types of leadership and capabilities, whether it be designing exercises for disasters, grants management, compliance, and other different things that I attained since that very first day where I said, the light bulb went off and I said, I want to do something, and I just don't want to ride an ambulance every day. And I found that I was able to integrate because of my interpersonal skills with a lot of people. And the one thing that I would always take and give out to everyone is never forget where you came from, because the day you forget is the day you're turned off on the radio by everyone else that rode alongside you or came up alongside you. The best gift you can give is your experience to the person that's beneath you or alongside of you, because you don't know everything, and they might not know anything of what your experiences are. So the mesh is what gets you to where you are now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I wanted to just go back to being a young person and wanted to become a leader. And to you guys, like I said, I was a firefighter with the FDNY, and like when you're new on the job, I mean, you've got obviously a lot to learn, but you also don't want to appear to be cocky or brash. The worst thing you want is like the old timers, the senior guys, to be like, who is this punk, I've learned, forgotten more knowledge about on this job than you've acquired at this point, how many years you got on the job, kid, that kind of stuff, how much of a role does that play, in the volunteer EMS world? Like, did you guys run up against that stuff when you tried to take on more of a leadership role?
So I think I was lucky. I came into an organization that was at a point of change when I came in. So there was opportunities that presented themselves and kind of roles budded by having, to some degree being in the right place, but also having just had some previous experiences that I was able to bring to the table. And there's definitely some of that. I think that exists, and there's a flavor of that in every field, right? And it doesn't matter your profession. It doesn't matter what you do. And I think that for me personally, what was the drive was that I saw there was an opportunity to make our organization stronger and better, and I understood the importance of it within the community and the opportunities that it provided for me. And so then as I continued to grow with the organization, it's more of looking back at how do I continue to make sure that those same doors can open for other people. I think one of the biggest things that gives us that we like to at Park Slope that we like to embrace is we have two really strong groups of folks that are using this as a stepping stone somewhere else. But then we also have the folks that are coming in that kind of aren't really sure, right? Our average member that comes in is between the age of 18 and 25. It's rare that we have folks above that. They do occur. But so we have the folks that are really determined and they know they're going to medical school and they're doing this and this is a stepping stone. And then we have the other folks that come in and kind of floundering and giving them the opportunity to see, hey, what are some different paths in both healthcare and public safety that they could potentially navigate? That's kind of what keeps the drive going.
So how I became a leader is there was no leaders. So that's basically,
Filling the void.
we needed somebody to step up. We were at the brink of closing and the group of us stepped up and we got the organization back into shape. I'm glad that we had that group there because everybody was abandoning ship and leaving. So there was no leaders, and because of that I think that it made the trip a little harder as well because we weren't leaders. We had to figure everything out by trial and error. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff is, to touch on your question is to basically, we have to figure out what the membership wants. And we're so set in our ways that it's hard to, I guess, channel what they're saying and make it and applying it.
Well, but you said people were leaving the organization. So what was it that made you want to stay and take more of the active role?
I didn't want the organization to fail. We have loyalty to our organizations, the people that's been there for years. So, where everybody else, was moving on and doing their stuff, we were trying to build and get us to the point, at least where we're at now, even where our goals are set so we can be in the next 5 to 10 years.
All right, well, this next one is kind of goes back to the last discussion we're having the breakout session. What are some examples of how you motivate your volunteers? What, if anything, do you do when volunteers aren't living up to the responsibilities to the organization?
All right, I guess it's on me. Sure.
Go ahead.
So I think for us, a big thing has been acknowledging who are our volunteers. What are the things that make them tick? And one of the big things that actually one of my predecessors did that I think was so instrumental is, and it's really specific to volunteer EMS, but is many organizations, you become a volunteer, you spend 6 months as a dispatcher, then you spend another 6 months as a third or a fourth or a fifth or something of that nature. And I have to give credit to him. He took all of that out of the picture. And he set up a structure that was a little bit more in line with what some of the career organizations did, where there was a couple shifts of mentorship with a senior person, a crew chief, an FTO, whatever the title was that you want to put in that place. And then very quickly, members that were EMTs were pushed into operational roles. And I think one of the reasons why we have flourished as an organization is, yes, we still have 70 hours of orientation that people do before they get anywhere near an ambulance and stuff of that nature. But we streamlined it and we made it so it was very clear that you're going to start on day one and you're going to have 5 days of orientation. Before COVID, they were just one weekend after another. You had to make that commitment. And there was a little bit of holding people accountable, right? You had to commit that you were coming in for 5 weekends in a row. And then after that, you could mix and match your schedule and do whatever you needed to do. But for those 5 weekends, you had to hold to that. Post-COVID environment, we've changed things a little bit, but we're still kind of actually now going back to some of what we were doing prior to make that continue. But then the last part of it is we do need to hold people accountable. At the end of the day, EMS agencies, if they're volunteer or career, need to have guidelines. They need to have policy and procedure. And I think the important part, though, is like what Chief Hunsaker was saying before in her keynote was 90% of our folks do amazing things every day, and they need to be our focus. And it needs to not be a focus on the 10% that are problematic. Officers do need to address those, but I think the more professionally that we did address those issues and less politically and stuff of that nature, and focus on that positivity, the negative aspects tend to wash away.
I would piggyback on Lewis's discussion on that. Everyone in the volunteer community is totally different from the minute they come in to the minute they depart. It's our job in the leadership roles to identify the likes, the dislikes, the pros, the cons, and highlight as much as we can to get them to want to come and continue what they're doing. The balance is that we are, a statutory agency with protocols, procedures, and a business model that has to be carried out. So you'd like to be as lenient as you can. You like to be as flexible as you can. But at the end of the day, you have to go down to your policies and procedures. And where you don't have any more flexibility, the procedure has to come and take over, or the protocol, takes over. In the field, you like to do everything you want for the patient. But at some point, there's nothing more, whether it be a cardiac arrest and you don't have ROSC, and now you have an asystolic patient and you have a grieving family, and you got to say, what do we do? Well, unfortunately, console the family in preparation for what's about to happen, because you've seen it millions of times. The family has not, or hopefully has not. So just like with your crews, at some point, you're gonna have to take them to task. And your crews need to know that you're your friend, they're friends on the ambulance, but when it comes to policy, you have to keep them to a particular standard. Because if you don't have a standard, you have nothing to go by. It hurts at the end of the day to say to this EMT, that's there 40 hours a week, you didn't do this right, or you crashed the ambulance because, you weren't operating with due regard. And, there's nothing you can get out of it. And, bringing from my management history, on my paid job, when you have 100 people that you're managing, you try to navigate everything to everyone's wants and desires. But there comes time that everything just comes down to one small area where you can't get that one person out of trouble, or you can't fix this person's problem that they created, be it, the dead battery. Oh, you jumpstart the ambulance, you change 2 batteries, you're good to go. But, if you lose a $25,000 monitor and didn't tell anybody, you can't just get them out of it. So it's like, there has to be a level of consequence with responsibility. It's like parenting, don't do this or else. And if there's never an or else, The kid gets wind of it really quick and they just keep doing it. And it's a repetitive cycle that just never gets solved. So on the EMS management side of the shop, there has to be some form of or else, even in the volunteer world. Even if it's telling someone you got to do 20 hours of cleaning, of truck cleaning, there's got to be some form of or else, or you'll never get everyone in line to focus on the end mission. Yes.
Well, of course, it has to be responsible. Lower level. No, but first time.
Well, the first words of leadership is understand that you're not the end all be all. And someone beside you or below you, or even above you, may know something more than you do. And you have to have a willingness to believe you could be wrong before someone could tell you you're wrong. And that's a very good point, because there's a lot of leaders out there in all walks of life that cannot understand that. How could I be wrong? I went through all this training. I have MBAs, I have graduate degrees, and people are trying to say you're wrong or you're not doing this right. At that point, that's the wrong person for the job. And it's up to the rest of the organization to find a successor for that person. But you have to be humble about your position. I'm in EMS 43 years, and there's been many times I had to say, you know, you're right. But at times, people have to understand that I'm right and that I can't do anything to help your cause. And you just gotta, you know, come down to reality, and it is the way it is. You know, we're all a fraternity in EMS, but at the end of the day, there's structure, responsibility, and it just has to come to somewhere.
Okay. Please.
Yeah, those great answers. All I can say is my organization doesn't do well with this. So motivating our members, that's where we struggle a lot, to motivate them to come in and to volunteer. Our retention is not the greatest, and I'll be the example of that. So it is just, you know, it's hard to motivate the membership that wants to be there when the leaders don't show up and do what they have to do. And we're an example of that. You know, once you get into a position, you think it's all about paper pushing, and you don't get on the truck, and you don't do this, and you don't do that. And the new members see that. And then they feel like, well, we're here on the truck. And I've been a member like that. When I came into the organization, I said there was no leadership. So, you know, I was sitting on the truck for weeks and weeks and weeks, and nobody was there, you know, to give me a, hey, you did a good job, or anything like that. So, you know, and we've tried to like fix that, but you still have a lot of people with the organization that are set in their ways, and they sit in positions of power or leadership, and they disturb. And you know that, and it's a lot of conflict when everything is a majority vote and you're not the majority.
Do you guys ever consider, like organizationally, like maybe, you know, term limits kind of these roles, that, you know, ones who are maybe like set in their ways in certain leadership roles, they have to, you know, go back to, you know, being you know, dispatcher duty or something along those lines, you know? Does that happen?
It's a little hard when nobody on the membership team wants to be a leader. So when you don't have other leaders to replace the leaders, you can't get rid of the leaders.
You have another question? Hold on, let me bring the mic to the button.
Maybe in regards to what Jesus was saying, that yeah, right. There's oftentimes resentment when you see like two classes of membership, and I think though that can be resolved sometimes simply by making it clear from the very beginning a better definition of roles, just like we talked about
Earlier,
officers and board of directors, and saying there are certain members who work in an administrative position, and so they're not going to be riding the bus for whatever reason. But also, I mean, a lot of talk has been done about structure and standards and consequences. But I don't know if this is going to be covered later or it's a good point to interject now. But the flip side is the reward system. Like, what do we do for that? I mean, things have changed by, now, with finances being an issue and people's time and things. But I mean, I remember the day when I started out years ago, we used to have an annual dinner. And there were awards given out for longevity, for calls, number of calls, 500, 1,000 calls, 1,500, so on and so forth. Safe driver awards, all sorts of things. And you would recognize that and recognize the work that people did. You would get an award for like first baby delivered or whatever it was, that there was some recognition that made them feel that they were being recognized.
Okay, so incentivizing and sort of building that as part of your kind of organizational culture that, make people feel like like you say, they belong, that they, and they're really important part of the organization. I think we have time for one more sort of, I don't want to say this is a softball question, but something I'm sure you guys have all thought about. What frustrates you more than anything else within your role in the volunteer EMS world? What's the most frustrating thing? Burnout.
People who've been doing it so long that they feel like nobody else knows anything. I think that frustrates me the most.
I would have to say it's twofold. Failure for EMS agencies to collaborate and communicate. EMS, although it's been through the 70s, independent EMS organizations, even fire departments, EMS, operate in silos. They have their own feeling of autonomy, that they are who they are. They want to be in charge. They want to, carry things through a certain way. I think we need to adjust the culture. We've lost too many volunteer EMS agencies, fire, independent, through the last 20, 30 years. And a lot of it is due to the inability of the individual leadership of a failing organization to collaborate operationally when they're having problems with the potential for mergers. Everyone hears merger and they say, oh, that's the corporate world. Let me tell you, EMS has evolved so much over the last 20 years. There's so many more statutory and training requirements that it's hard to fulfill them, for some organizations in small areas. But if you potentiate the two organizations and you put them together into one, you could do great things, and I think that a lot of the leadership really needs to take a look when they're, instead of, I call it going down with the ship, they should take a look at, where they are and how they could better themselves in the EMS world, because at the end of the day, they're not serving themselves, as the chief eloquently pointed out in the beginning. You're servicing your community. So in the end, if you depart from the community for whatever reason, are you servicing that community when you're gone? No. But if you merge or you collaborate with your neighbors, you could do such great things. You got to look down the road. Where are you in 5 years? What's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? I can tell you right now, there's a lot of EMS agencies in the region and in the state that don't have that. We have a joke, you live to your next paycheck. Well, a lot of these agencies live to their next budget. If they have one, we don't know. So you really got to take a good holistic approach and figure out where you are and how you could do better for the people that your agency was designed to help. But if you don't, you're just setting yourself up for failure, and that doesn't do your particular community any good.
I think I know we're running a long time, but I think Jerry hit it 100% all the points. And I think something that we forget, not only as frontline EMS providers, but also as EMS leaders, is for the average person in the community, what the side of the ambulance says when they have an emergency does not matter, right? And so if we can take some of our fiefdoms and put them aside and start working together in partnerships, sometimes more formal than others, right? If it's simple things like working on retention stuff, if it's team building events with a neighboring agency, or if it's more sophisticated mergers and stuff of that nature, like we've seen in parts of Queens recently, that's what's going to allow volunteer EMS to continue into the future. And it's continuing to evaluate how we want to move forward. That's the role, in my opinion, of EMS leadership today.
Thank you to our panelists. So we want to, Matt, do we want to open it up to the floor? We're going to keep moving on. All right. Well then, thank you, Jerry, Louis, Jesus.